Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. It's the 3rd of April, and our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy from Mizuho Bank in Singapore. Asian Midday Market Watch is powered by the Private Pension Administrator of Malaysia, or PPA, the central administrator for private retirement schemes. Now, Vishnu, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian. Good to be here. Always good to start the week with you.
Now, thanks, Vishnu. Now, before we get your insight, let's take a look and see how markets have performed in the first half of the day. But we will, of course, as usual, start with crypto markets. Now, Bitcoin is at 27,664. It's down 2.55%. Ethereum is at 1,775. It's down 2.08%. Looking across the regional equity markets, we start with the Straits Times Index, where you're at. It's up 0.64%. We have then Bursa Malaysia, which is up 0.34%. Shanghai is up 0.55%. The ASX All Ordinaries is up 0.48%. The Nikkei is up 0.53%. The Hang Seng is down 0.49%. And rounding up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is down 0.18%. Vishnu, your thoughts on how markets have performed in the first half of the day?
Well, it does look like they're starting the new quarter with quite a bit to contemplate. If markets were to just blindly follow the cue from the US on Friday, then it would be a very, I think, buoyant mood today because we had a very strong close on Friday in the US. Markets were up anywhere between 1.4 to 1.7%, mainly on the back of core PCE, a very close indicator of underlying inflation that the Fed watches, coming in slightly cooler than expected. I mean, for all purposes, it's still elevated. It doesn't change fundamentally this point of view, but it was a relief that markets latched onto, and they were happy to say, or at least projected as fewer Fed rate hikes, perhaps a pause sooner rather than later, and so that I think translated into a better discount rate and boosted valuations. But over the weekend, I think there's been reason for circumspection. One, I think, has got to do with the OPEC's surprise cut to production of 1.1 million barrels per day. That saw oil prices jumping at 1.8%, somewhere between 6 to 8% higher oil prices. Is certainly not the kind of news that markets are unaffected by in terms of the negative economic impact. Also, China apparently having retaliatory action against Micron. One presupposes that this has got to do with the ongoing tensions between US and China on chips and high-tech production equipment. So there is, it's still a left field fear, but there's a fear of escalating action against one another in the tech field with some spillover effects. That may partly explain why economies like Korea and Hong Kong are perhaps somewhat more cautious about the spillover negative and adverse effects from the two giants clashing on chips and high tech.
Now, in addition to that, speaking of negativity, we've got negative numbers coming out of Japan. So the Tankan survey showed that Japan's business mood soured to a 2-year low. What are your thoughts on it, especially coming from a Japanese bank? What sort of insights can you give us into those numbers?
Well, I think we can look at it three ways. The first is the obvious data in front of us. It tells us two things. It tells us, A, Japan is certainly affected by the mounting global headwinds, whether it's a cyclical downturn in demand for chips and high-tech products, or in terms of the uncertainty that swirls around due to high rates and the specter of banking crisis, so on and so forth. So that's really filtering through to the exporters. More interestingly, you also see an uneven economy in Japan. The reopening means that the services sector is fairly more buoyant, not as downbeat. And of course, anyone watching this for long enough will be wondering whether it's the manufacturing sector and the export sector that will catch up with services, or it's the services sector that after a while is going to catch down with manufacturing. if we believe in rationalization of the underlying economic momentum. The second order thing to think about is we've got a fairly weak yen, but that has not helped Japan's cause in terms of how manufacturers feel, how exporters feel, and so this really brings home the point that competitiveness in the currency alone is not enough, particularly in this situation where the headwinds are very, very complex. They are partly geopolitical in nature, partly very structural factors, and some of it is just untested in terms of a post-COVID kind of recovery. The last point is the BOJ's reaction to this is going to also be complicated. On one hand, they probably have to respond to sticky upward risks in price pressures, especially with Saudi's move keeping fuel prices elevated. But on the other hand, it clearly suggests that being too aggressive about any shift in positioning, particularly anything that even smells like tightening, may be really ill-timed. So for those speculators out there betting in a big way that the new incoming governor can make tectonic shifts, I think that's going to be somewhat of a risky bet. In market terms, it could be a widowmaker bet if taken the wrong way and taken.
And Vishnu, you took the words. I was going to ask you exactly that question, and you took the words out of my mouth. But looking ahead, then this week we've got a very data-heavy week across the region. Tell us what are the key events and data points that you're looking out for this week that will move markets.
So, I mean, just leaving the elephant in the room, which is the headline risks on the side and the more scheduled type of events. Markets this week will be focusing on US jobs because they want to put two and two together. The inflation side of things came in, so they want to put jobs together to see exactly where their Fed expectations are. The broader point here is that Fed expectations continue to be rather volatile. So let's not get too carried away one way or another. Probably a May hike is baked in. June will be data dependent. That's a very big picture for us. In the region, you'll have the RBNZ, the RBA, and the RBI. So down under Australia, New Zealand, and India all looking at policy meetings. We think India will go ahead and do the 25 basis point hike. RBA has got a case to hold, but not a convincing one. I think they're not, even if they hold and pause, it's not necessarily discarding a tightening bias per se. So that adds to the complexity in the policy space that will inevitably spill over into the currency space. And it really depends on what the dollar is doing on that day to determine exactly how far the currencies will go in their reactions.
Now, Vishnu, as always, thanks for all those insights. Appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Now, this is BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, which is powered by the Private Pension Administrator of Malaysia, PPA, which is the central administrator for private retirement schemes. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.